The New York Mets have a star-studded infield that's headlined by Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso. But how does that group stack up with the other teams in the National League East, particularly the Atlanta Braves? We are continuing our NL East division previews today, ranking infield on Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, as we rank infields in this division, a pattern is continuing to form where the Mets and the Braves are simply a class ahead of a lot of the teams in this division. And we start with the Nationals because this is a group that doesn't have a Juan Soto to boost them up like they did in the outfield rankings. It is abysmal. You could see an opening day infield, and maybe are likely to see an opening day infield. Maikel Franco, Alcides Escobar, Cesar Hernandez, and Josh Bell. Josh Bell, by far the best player there. You got three guys that, you could have made an argument a couple of years ago. Their careers were almost over. I will say Cesar Hernandez is probably not quite fair. He has been one of these guys that isn't good enough to get tendered a contract, but is still productive and a starter wherever he goes. So he's been solid. We remember him when he was with the Phillies. Remember Franco when he was also with the Phillies. So there are some familiar names. Alcides Escobar, of course, is the former shortstop of the Royals from the 2015 World Series champion team, the one that Noah Syndergaard tried to take his head off. But aside from some names what do you expect from that infield? So let's just stop talking about them. The one name, actually, I should mention, Carter Kieboom. It was a former top prospect that maybe they're still staking some hopes to, but a career 197 hitter with a 63 WRC plus. And again, WRC plus is weighted runs created plus, measuring hitters based on a league average of 100. So a 63 career WRC plus means he's 37% below a league average hitter. Now we go to the Phillies, and I look at the Phillies and the Marlins, and this was actually tough to pick one. You got Rhys Hoskins at first, Gene Segura at second, Didi Gregorius, luckily still the shortstop. Very happy they did not address that position. A little surprising that you see the money Trevor Story got. You look at what they ended up giving to a Castellanos and a Schwarber. Wouldn't it have made sense just to get a franchise shortstop instead of one of those two guys? Maybe Story didn't want to play for the Phillies, but to me, I would have overpaid a bit to get him because that's how much that position needed to be addressed. I know that that Joe Girardi loves him some Didi from their time with the Yankees, but he is the worst defensive shortstop in baseball. Not a good hitter anymore either. That's just going to drag down your entire infield. And Alec Boehm was really good in 2020, not great last season. You look at the Marlins, it's Jesus Aguilar at first, Jazz Chisholm at second, Miguel Rojas at short, Joey Wendell at third, or Brian Anderson. Both of those guys sort of fill a similar super utility role, able to play like Billy Upper loves, right? Guys that can play in the dirt and the grass. These are guys that will play some outfield and some infield. And I sneakily like the Marlins in this matchup, and I'll tell you why. You start with Rhys Hoskins, and this is the one reason why the Phillies would probably be the consensus third best infield in this division, because they have the best player of the bunch with Hoskins, a career 126 WRC plus last year, 127, hit 27 home runs. Not a good defensive first baseman, but he's a bopper and a better bopper than Jesus Aguilar, who's good, was really good in 2020. Last year, a 112 WRC plus, so above average. And that's also his career mark as well, 112. So he's been performing up to what you would expect. He hit 22 home runs. He's good. Hoskins is better. You also have Garrett Cooper that could play some first base, but he's going to end up being part of our DH conversation, which we'll have next week, where I'm going to go through the DHs and the bench. Then we'll talk about the bullpen, and then I'll give you sort of a composite score from everything we've done here, ranking out these teams with all the different position groups combined. But you look at that, right? That's the one edge the Phillies have. Second base, Gene Segura maybe is the other edge. He's been better. Last year, a 2.4 WAR, Chisholm 1.4. Or actually, no, that's the projected this year. There this year, Segura's projected 2.4 F4, Chisholm 1.4. And last year, I think Chisholm was 1.5 and Segura was 2.6. It was right along lines, essentially being projected to have the same seasons. I think Chisholm has the potential to pop this year, and the Marlins need him to if they're going to be able to jumpstart this rebuild. They think he has 30-30 potential, 30 home runs, 30 steals. We haven't seen it yet, but I don't know if the separation is that great between those two players. Where I see the greatest separation is at shortstop, which again, you might not look at it on paper and you say, oh, Didi Gregorius, Miguel Rojas, is Rojas that good? But to me, I've watched these two guys play baseball, up close, and Rojas is a good ball player. He's not great, but he's a quality defensive shortstop. For a long time, I thought he would be almost like the Louis Guillorme of the Mets, just that backup utility infielder. That's what I thought he'd be first career, but he's turned himself into a decent starter. He's a career 265 hitter, is always around there, 270. He was great in the 2020 season, but still just decent production. Where Didi last year had a 68 WRC plus, basically hit at the Mendoza line. I think Didi's washed, and I think Rojas is still a good leader. I like Rojas way more than Didi. I might be alone in that, but I really do think he's a much better player. Then you go to third base. Alec Bohm was terrible. Could he be much better? Sure. But a 75 WRC plus last year, he is atrocious defensively. You look at Joey Wendell and almost like Rojas, just they don't hurt you. They're just decent, good baseball players. Good IQ, make all the plays. Wendell is almost the next version of a Ben Zobrist, although Zobrist maybe had a little bit more offensive punch in his heyday, but I like Wendell more than Bohm for sure. Brian Anderson, way more. Brian Anderson, a career 111 WRC plus. He's always been a guy where it just feels like he hasn't quite gotten all of his potential, and really he's always been just scratching the surface. But I like him as a bounce back, breakthrough candidate more than Bohm, just going off of a 60-game season where he was good. Also, the Phillies do have an X factor in Bryson Stott, who will be up this year. That could change things. I think most people would put the Phillies above the Marlins, but in my personal rankings, I look at it, I look at the names. I think the Marlins have a better infield. Not much better, but better. Still, though, if we look at our rankings with the outfields compared to the infields, I think there's a far greater separation here when it comes to the Mets and the Braves and their infields just being far superior to the other three teams in this division. The question, though, is do the Mets have a better infield than the reigning champions? We'll talk about that in just a minute, but first I want to tell you about Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar ever. Built Bars come low in calories, low in sugar, low in fat, but they're high in protein, they're high in fiber. They come covered in 100% real chocolate. They are the perfect replacement for those sweets that are just not going to make you feel good. Whereas Built Bar, you can feel good about yourself when you eat one after a workout, or when you wake up in the morning for breakfast, or for a dessert at the end of the day. They also have the new Built Bar Puffs, which are just delightful. The first ever protein infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat that comes covered in that same 100% real chocolate with incredible flavors like the yummy cinnamony churro, the banana cream pie, and the coconut marshmallow. Built is always coming out with new limited time flavors, so make sure you check their site often to see what's new. And when you're there, make sure you use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, Mets, Braves. Once again, these two teams, who has the better infield now? I would say it's close. But the more you dive into the numbers, it's hard not to give the edge to the Braves. I'm always going to try to make the argument for the Mets, right? It's the Mets podcast. I want you to feel good about this team going into the season, and there's a lot to feel good about in this infield. I love Pete Alonso. Francisco Lindor, I think, is going to have a monster bounce back year. I think he's a very, very sneaky MVP bet. We talked about that on yesterday's show. I don't know if he would really be a top 10 consideration right now, but I just think the narrative, and I'm imagining a 2006 Beltron season with Lindor where that could be in the realm of possibility, where Lindor could be the best infielder in this division. Certainly throughout his career, he has been the best infielder. He's had the best career of any infielder in this division. But coming off the season he just had with Matt Olson coming in, with the season that Austin Riley had in the second half, tough to make him, the best infielder going into the year. I mean, for the Mets, you'd still say Pete Alonso is their best infielder. But if we're comparing shortstops in this division, no doubt in my mind now that Trey Turner is with the Dodgers, that Lindor is absolutely the best shortstop. Dansby Swanson maybe had the best year last year, a 3.2 F4 compared to Lindor at 2.7. But you look from June 1st on, Swanson was worth 2.6 when it comes to his F4. Lindor 2.5, so basically the same, but Lindor played 30 less games. So from June on, Lindor was showing to be the better player. And if you look at the career numbers, certainly has been the better player. A career 117 WRC plus for Lindor, 17% better than league average. Swanson, 98. Defensively, Lindor worth 20 outs above average last year, way better than Swanson at 3 outs above average. We just know that Lindor is the best defensive shortstop in baseball. And Swanson is above average, but only slightly above average. You look at the offensive numbers last season, though, and Swanson was better. I mean, 248 average compared to Lindor at 230, 311 on base. So Lindor had the edge there at 322. But slugging percentage, Swanson had 27 home runs and a 449 slugging, and you had Lindor at 412 with 20 home runs. So what Swanson has done is he has given the Braves what I almost talk about wanting out of Lindor, in that he gives them above average defense and home runs. Lindor can just do both of those things better. And that's why he is, in my opinion, a far better player and a far better bet to have a good season this year. And that is the one huge edge the Mets have here. But you look at second base, Ozzie Albies over McNeil. I think everyone would take Albies at third base, Riley over Escobar. I think everyone would take Riley, especially look at what he did down the stretch last year. Altogether, he had 33 home runs, 107 RBIs, and 135 WRC plus on this season. But in the second half, I mean, Austin Riley, a huge reason the Braves won this division, hit 333, 377 on base, 599 slugging, 19 home runs, and a 155 WRC plus. Got better defensively too. Riley, just a better player and a player more in his prime than Eduardo Escobar, who's good, had a 3.0 F4 last season, 28 home runs, but just doesn't stack up to the young talent. At first base, Matt Olson is a better player than Pete Alonso. I hate to say it, but he is. Last year, a 5.0 F4 season, Alonso a 3.0 F4, so he was worth 2 extra wins. He had 39 home runs playing in the Coliseum, which is the furthest thing from a hitter's ballpark. It is an absolute pitcher's haven, and yet he left the yard all the time. Alonso, 37 home runs. I think Alonso is going to have more home runs this season. I would not be surprised if Alonso had a better season. But Matt Olson is arguably the best defensive first baseman in baseball, coming off a better year. He's the better player right now going into the season. The one place where I do want to have a little bit of an argument, I do want to throw some stats out there, because everyone who listens to this show knows that I am a Jeff McNeil stan. I think he's going to be way better this year. I look at his career numbers. I think McNeil is a very underrated player. And so I like to point out the statistics because the statistics tend to back him up in a lot of instances. And since 2018, when McNeil debuted and Albies was in his first full season, the WRC plus has shown that McNeil has been a far better hitter. 126 WRC plus for McNeil, 26% better than your league average hitter. Albies is at 107. Now, this is due to getting on base. Ozzie Albies, a 272 hitter. McNeil, 299 hitter since 2018, or that's his career numbers, obviously. Albies, 322 on base. McNeil, 364. So that is where his WRC plus is much better than Albies. It's from getting on base. The slugging percentage, Albies slightly better at 479, McNeil 459. The defense, casual baseball fan, a Braves fan, anyone who isn't watching McNeil up close would say he is far inferior defensively than Ozzie Albies. There's Mets fans who still don't understand that McNeil's a great defensive player. And I've had these arguments all off season, but I'll throw you the numbers again. The two main defensive metrics we have: outs above average and defensive run saved. The best two that tell you what these players are giving a team defensively. Last year, Ozzie Albies, 1 out above average, 1 defensive run saved. McNeil, in way less time at the position. These are stats that accumulate over time. Four outs above average, 4 defensive runs saved. So you look at that. Jeff McNeil is a better defensive second baseman, and you look at the WRC plus, he's been the better hitter. So what's the rub? Why do I still say Albies is better? You look at the F4 since 2018. Ozzie Albies even 13, McNeil 9.1. Granted, McNeil has played less games, played 368 games, completed 5 compared to 503 from Albies. If you were to accumulate out what McNeil would do over 503 games, his F4 would be 12.4, slightly below Albies. So Albies still, even if they had played the same amount of games, has been a little bit more valuable, and a lot of that is due to home runs and stolen bases. 84 home runs and 52 bags swiped since 2018 for Albies. Jeff McNeil has 37 home runs, 15 steals. That's the difference. Albies hit 30 home runs last year. McNeil had a down season. No one's going to say going into the year that McNeil is a better player than Ozzie Albies. He has a much better reputation around the league. He also is such a flashy player that I think he gets overrated a little bit compared to McNeil, who's, underrated at times. I still would prefer, or I don't know if I'd say prefer. I still think that McNeil's a good bet to have a better year than Ozzie Albies, but you can't really rank him ahead of Albies in any rankings going into this season. And because of that, when the Rays have a better first baseman, second baseman, and third baseman, their infield's better. And I think that the margin between their infield and the Mets infield is greater than the margin between the Mets outfield and the Braves outfield, which, if you listen to Wednesday's show, I had the Mets number 1 and the Braves slightly behind at number 2. So with that said, as we've gone through this exercise up to this point, the Mets had the better rotation and the better outfield. The Braves had the better infield, and spoiler alert, the better bullpen when we get to that next week. These teams are very even. And that is why I want to talk about what I think is vitally important to close out the show today. The New York Mets have to get out to a fast start. I'll explain why in just a minute. But first, I want to tell you about BetOnline, because it is that time of year again. College basketball's tournament has been upon us, and we are now heading into the final weekend. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So I wanted to close the show today talking about something that I think is vitally important to this Mets team. I think if they're going to win this division, you never say you're going to win the division in April, but I think the Mets have an opportunity to do just that in April and May. This is a team that needs to get off to a great start. And generally, the Mets in the first 2 weeks of the season have gotten off to good starts. But I'm talking about going out and winning 12 or 14. I'm talking about sending a message early on. I look at this Braves team, and they got a lot of young pitching. They're waiting on Mike Soroka to come back. They got Acuna coming off an injury. They got Ozuna coming off a suspension. They got Olson getting integrated into the fold. There's a massive leadership vacuum with Freddie Freeman now in LA. It's a young team, a World Series hangover. I could see them stumbling out of the gate, not being, 5, 10 games under 500 or anything the first couple of months, but I could just see them sort of lingering in that 500 range. And the Mets need to do what they did not do last year. Last year, if there's one lesson that we learned throughout that first half and leading into the trade deadline as well, the Mets never grabbed hold of the division. They never took that stranglehold, never put a foot down on the neck of their competition and just won it. If you remember 1986, oh my God, who is the legendary Cardinals manager whose name is escaping me? Is it Whitey? Whitey Ford? Man, I have no You hear that? You hear the lack of confidence in my voice as I said that? It's not Whitey Ford, is it? Oh my God, who is it? I'm gonna leave all this in. I'm not gonna let myself off the hook on this one. Legendary Cardinals manager. I mean, I'm picturing the dude. Unbelievable. I'm mad at myself right now. I mean, it's just the guy who's Herzog, right? Is that who it is? I have not pulled it up yet. Okay, Whitey Herzog. I got the Whitey part right. I mean, come on, poor Keith Hernandez and everything Herzog did to him. If you remember in '86, it's been widely recalled that there was a series where it just became obvious that the Mets were going to run away with the division, and they did, and they made that statement early. This is a Mets team that's capable of being the class of the National League East, but you can't just labor your way through the early season. There can't be these offensive struggles where the Mets had last year, where it just didn't feel like they could score runs and figure anything out. They have to go out, win a bunch of games. Right now, you have Max Scherzer, Jacob DeGrom, healthy, ready to go. Carlos Carrasco, Taijuan Walker, they're both healthy. Chris Bassett, the new addition on the trade market, he looks prime and ready to go. Your rotation is set. You got Lindor, hot in camp. The entire team is just brimming with confidence at this moment. You got the new manager in Buck Showalter. This is a team that can go out and send a message early. And if they do that, if they can send a message early and you get to a point where the Mets are, heading into June with a 10 plus game lead in this division, that's what you have to do, because I think the Braves are a team, just like last year, that's going to eventually figure it out. They're a smart organization. They're well run. They'll make the right additions midseason. They'll debut the right prospects. They're going to be around. They're going to be a team that can run away with this division late like they did last year. And what happened last year, the Mets just never grabbed it. They just didn't. And at the trade deadline, you're like, why? What are the Braves doing? And they haven't had a good season. Acuna is out. Why are they trading for Soler? Why are they trading for Rosario? Why did they get Jock Peterson? Why are they doing all these things? And then it just clicked. The Mets can't let that happen again. And so they have to do their work early. And if they can put this division on ice, then a team like the Braves is going to be like, well, we just won the World Series. We got Matt Olson locked up. We got Acuna locked up. We got Albies locked up. We got our young pitching in place. Charlie Morton is the only player that's getting close to being on his way out. I mean, that's not a significant player to them long term. Austin Riley's young. Yeah, Dansby Swanson is a player that maybe they trade at the deadline because he's in a contract here if they don't think he's their franchise shortstop. There's not that pressure on the Braves. Now, they always want to be good. They always want to contend. They always want to, hold that superiority in this division. And they're going to go for it if they can. But if you, again, do your work on the front end, jump out to a big lead, you can put yourself in a position where, sure, maybe the Braves and the Phillies are still buying because they're duking it out for a wild card spot. But you don't want to give them that. You don't want to crack that door open again. And that's what happened last year. The Mets never slammed that door shut. We forget now, in retrospect, after the Braves held up the trophy and, won the division, and the Mets had this horrible collapse where they finished in third. We forget that the Mets did own the division in the early parts of the season as far as just being in first place. They held that lead the whole time. But it was always like a 5-game lead, 4-game lead, a 3-game lead. It was never 11, 12 games. They just never did that. And I think that was the difference last year. I think that's why the Braves now added another World Series. It's unfortunate because I don't think the Mets could have necessarily won a World Series with the team they had last year. That roster was flawed. But we could be in a completely different place right now. Just looking at the prospects of this division, had the Mets slam that door shut and at least could have won a division and be building on some more positive momentum going into this year. But the optimism is sky high for this team. And that's why I think they have to ride that optimism and that wave in these early parts of the season. Anyway, that's going to be all for Locked On Mets this week. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan. Locked On MLB is where you want to go to learn about everything going on in the game right now and also to think back to some of the great moments of the past. You can follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.